The barn reeked of old rain, rust, and resignation. Light didn't shine so much as leak through cracked overhead beams, landing in pale streaks on warped plywood. One bulb flickered near the back wall, buzzing like a dying insect. The rest of the space was thick with silence, unnatural, heavy. Like even the shadows were waiting for something to die. They were all watching it. At the center of the ring, under a crooked spotlight, lay a horse. Or what was left of one. The animal was barely breathing, its chest rising in slow, rattled gasps. Its hide, once some shade of red, perhaps, was now grayish, patchy, scraped raw in places. Bones jutted against skin like splinters pressed through parchment. One back leg twitched erratically, not in resistance, but in exhaustion. Dried blood crusted at the base of its tail. Its eyes didn't track movement. They stared, glassy, at the dirt beneath its own head. Next to it, propped on a splintered board and written in permanent marker, was a hand-painted sign. $1. No history. No pedigree. No future. No one bid. No one moved. Men lined the railings in denim jackets and thick gloves, their faces hard, their boots planted. But no one spoke. They didn't need to. The price said everything. This wasn't about commerce. It was a funeral pretending to be a sale. Then she entered. The door creaked once behind her. No dramatic slam. No announcement. Just the sound of boots scraping across hay-stained concrete. Eden Marlowe stepped into the barn like someone returning to the ruins of a childhood dream. She was lean, road-worn, her jacket 3 shades too old and stitched at the shoulders with something like memory. Her braid hung low, wind-frayed. The dust of distance clung to her clothes. Heads turned, but cautiously. No one greeted her. The kind of silence that followed was sharp, suspicious. She walked down the aisle without looking at anyone, her gaze fixed straight ahead, at the ring, at the form lying inside it. And for a moment, the barn seemed to inhale. No one knew her name yet. But they felt the shift. Near the back, obscured by beams and old ropes, a man leaned against the wall with a wooden cane tucked beneath one arm. His beard was gray. His eyes, sharper than most. Silas Creed hadn't spoken in nearly 15 minutes. But now, he stepped forward just enough to catch the light. His gaze locked on the horse's right flank. There, beneath a curl of tangled hair, was a mark. Barely visible. A crescent-shaped scar that curved back like a question mark. His voice came out low, hoarse. "It's him," he muttered. "Damn fool, they brought him here." Nobody heard him. Or if they did, no one responded. Up at the ring, Eden had stopped walking. She stood just outside the wooden railing. Close enough to feel the dying heat from the horse's body. But she didn't speak. Didn't move. She just stared. The horse didn't lift its head. Didn't blink. But its ear twitched once, toward her. That was enough to make one of the men shift uncomfortably. He cleared his throat, but didn't say a word. From somewhere in the barn, the auctioneer, who'd been leaning awkwardly on a stool, finally straightened his back and forced out a dry, practiced line. "We've got one on the board. $1. No lower bids. No promises." Silence answered him. No hands raised. No murmurs exchanged. Just the hum of failing light overhead and the shallow, desperate rasp of a dying animal who hadn't been touched in days. Eden didn't move. Neither did the horse. Eden stepped forward. The sound of her boots echoed in the barn like someone had just broken a seal that wasn't meant to be touched. No one had moved in minutes. But now every gaze locked to her. She moved slow, methodical, not out of fear, but as if each step demanded permission from something older than the room itself. When she reached the edge of the auction ring, she stopped. The stallion hadn't moved since she entered. His sides still rose in uneven rhythm. His eyes remained clouded, staring somewhere far beyond the rotting boards beneath his head. But Eden didn't flinch. She reached into the inner pocket of her coat and pulled out a single, folded dollar bill. Its edges were worn. A tear ran through the corner, taped once in the past. She didn't wave it. Didn't announce it. She just stepped closer to the railing and, without ceremony, placed it on the ledge beneath the wooden sign. $1. No history. No pedigree. No future. Still not a word. And then, quietly, like a breath not meant to be spoken, she said it. I know him. 3 words. Not loud. Not trembling. Just flat and certain, as if the weight of truth didn't require force to land. The silence that followed wasn't passive anymore. It bristled. Hardened. Like the room didn't know what to do with what it had just heard. One of the men by the fence blinked, looked sideways toward another, but said nothing. Someone in the back shifted their stance, arms crossed tighter. No voices. No scoffs. Just stillness, taut. Even the auctioneer, halfway through scratching his beard, froze mid-gesture. Eden didn't explain. She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes stayed fixed on the stallion's face. The angle of his head hadn't changed, but something had. There was tension now at the edges of his jaw, like the body had heard, even if the mind hadn't caught up. One twitch. One ear. Then still again. I know him. The words rang longer the second time, not because she repeated them, but because the room finally understood she meant it. Silas watched from the shadows. He knew that tone. That kind of quiet only came from people who'd lived through loss and crawled back without asking for directions. He looked at the scar again, barely visible beneath the tangle of winter-matted hair. The crescent. Branded long ago. Not by fire, but by consequence. His gut twisted. "Goddamn," he murmured. No one looked at him. No one needed to. Every eye was still on the girl. The auctioneer cleared his throat, then stopped, as if unsure whether this transaction was still his to officiate. After a long breath, he managed, "That's $1 on the table. Are you confirming the bid?" Eden nodded once. That was it. No speech. No plea. No tears. Just a transaction so unremarkable it became unforgettable. Silas stepped back deeper into shadow. He didn't want her to see his face. Not yet. Not while he still wasn't sure whether this was mercy or penance. The dollar bill still sat on the wooden rail, unmoved. The stallion's breath rasped in the cold air. No one in the barn had spoken since Eden's voice cracked the silence. But inside her mind, the world was no longer here. It had already started drifting backward. Not through memory, but through muscle. Through a weight she'd carried so long it had lost its name. The moment she'd whispered, "I know him," the ghosts had stirred. 9 years ago. The same auction barn had been louder then, still falling apart, but not this quiet. Eden had stood in the same dust, but smaller, 17, furious, and shaking. And her father had stood beside her. Garrett Marlowe. He had been built from wood and smoke, voice low, boots always stained with earth. His hands were calloused in ways no city vet could fake, but his eyes had always held too many secrets. The kind that don't burn out, only smolder. That spring, the whispers had started. Quiet at first. About foals born in the off-season. About bloodlines that didn't match registration. About a name that kept coming up in hushed accusations. Redemption. Not the name of a horse. The name of a mistake. Eden remembered the day she found the letter. It wasn't mailed. It wasn't meant to be. She'd found it tucked inside her father's second-best coat, the one he only wore to town. The paper was creased too neatly, folded with that deliberate, masculine stillness that men used when they couldn't bear to speak aloud. The handwriting was his. Precise. Unapologetic. To whoever finds this one, I'm gone. I did it. Not for money. Not for titles. But because I was tired of breeding ghosts with names. They want papers. I want life. If redemption survives, he won't carry their approval. But he'll carry mine. That'll have to be enough. He never signed it. The day the inspectors arrived, she had been in the old corral with the yearlings. Nathan had pulled up in his clean black truck first, stepped out like he still belonged. Still called her kid with that half smile that used to mean something. She thought he'd come to help. Instead, he handed over a clipboard and didn't look her in the eye. "It's just business," he'd said, voice low. Her father had stood at the porch, saying nothing. By the end of the week, the registration was revoked. The breeding license pulled. The grant money frozen. Redemption, the foal nobody could trace, was ordered to be removed or surrendered. Eden had wanted to fight. Wanted to scream. But Garrett hadn't raised his voice once. "They didn't take anything we didn't already know," he told her. Then he went inside. And he never spoke of redemption again. The barn felt colder now. Back in the present, Eden's fingers gripped the edge of the stall railing. Her nails dug into the grain, and her throat ached from holding in something far heavier than words. She had left that same month. Took the bus. Left a note on the counter. No goodbye. No map. She didn't attend the hearing. Didn't come back for the funeral. The papers called it a quiet death. Heart failure. But anyone who knew Garrett Marlowe knew better. He died the day they took his legacy and called it fraud. Nathan Cross had vanished into the system like nothing happened. Transferred to a new division. Became a liaison for the thoroughbred registry. Got himself quoted in magazines. Preserving the integrity of bloodlines, they said. And redemption? Gone. Or so she thought. She never imagined he'd end up here, collapsed under a spotlight for sale at $1, discarded like a counterfeit coin. And yet, there he was. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth, breath hitching. The truth was sharp, undeniable. She had left them both. The first time she saw redemption, really saw him, he was a foal wrapped in mud and frost, born 2 weeks early behind the main barn. He hadn't cried. Hadn't struggled. Just breathed. Her father had stood in the snow, staring down at him like he'd seen the end of something and wasn't sure whether to run or kneel. He's different, he'd said. Not with fear. With awe. And it had been Nathan, then still a friend, who had looked at the foal's curved spine, at the oddly shaped blaze on his forehead, and whispered, "You sure this is what you want to bet your name on?" Garrett hadn't answered. But Eden had knelt beside the tiny colt, brushed a finger over the white mark, and smiled. "We'll call him Redemption," she'd said. Back in the auction barn, the stallion lay still. But something in his breathing had changed. It wasn't hope. It wasn't strength. It was defiance. The kind that lives not in muscle, but memory. Eden looked down at the dollar she'd placed. One paper for another. Redemption never had documents. But he'd always had a name. A name built on what her father refused to surrender, no matter the cost. She turned away from the stall just briefly, her eyes scanning the back of the barn. Silas was gone. Only his cane print remained in the dust. She whispered, not to anyone in particular. I left you behind. Both of you. I let them erase everything. Then she turned back to the stallion. But I'm not walking away again. The trailer groaned under the weight it wasn't built to carry. The tires dug into the muddy gravel behind the barn as Silas backed his old truck into place with slow, careful precision. The ramp thudded down, uneven, soaked through. Redemption hadn't moved since the auction. It took them 37 minutes to get him onto the mattress they'd lashed to a makeshift sled, Eden pulling at the front, Silas bracing the rear. No one spoke. There was no time for conversation, only breathless exertion and the occasional grunt of pain as the stallion's leg spasmed beneath his weight. His hooves dragged behind him like anchors. By the time they reached the barn, both of them were soaked through with sweat, and the sky had already turned a darker shade of warning. The old barn had once held 20 head. Now it held dust, broken halters, and memories that creaked louder than the beams. Eden knelt beside the stallion and ran her hand down his neck, what was left of it. His coat was torn in places by old fencing and winter storms. One of his hind legs was swollen to twice its natural size, the hoof cracked, black at the edge. His left eye was nearly glazed over. The right was dull, as if light no longer belonged inside it. His ribs were a map of starvation. 3 deep lacerations ran along his flank, some fresh, others scabbed unevenly. There were signs of infection. Flies buzzed around wounds. His breath rasped, wet and irregular. Eden pressed her fingers against his chest. Still beating. Barely. A sluggish, exhausted rhythm. He's septic, she muttered. And dehydrated. He hasn't eaten in days. Longer, Silas said. Auction house feeds once. If that. She didn't wait for instruction. She moved. First the legs. She patted the cracked hooves with cotton strips soaked in iodine, then packed them in damp burlap. Silas handed her what he had, 2 half-used tubes of antibiotic cream, a rusted bucket, and a mason jar of powdered electrolytes from a decade ago. She didn't flinch. She measured. Mixed. Applied. Then the wounds. With trembling fingers, she clipped away dried hair. Cleaned the blood with salt water, teeth gritted at every winch from the stallion. She whispered to him as she worked, not full sentences, just sounds. Just her voice. He didn't flinch. He didn't respond. But he didn't pull away. Silas lit an oil lantern and hung it above the stall. The light flickered across the old wood and over the Marianfol poster peeling behind them, a memory of what this place used to be. You think he knows you're here? Silas asked quietly. Eden didn't answer. She was wrapping Redemption's chest in gauze when Silas reached into his coat. He pulled out a thin leather-bound journal, the edges cracked, the spine worn smooth. I didn't mean to keep it, he said. But your father, he left this with me. Said I should hold on to it. In case. Eden stared at the book. Her hands paused. Silas set it beside her without another word. She didn't open it yet. Instead, she stayed with the horse. Hour by hour. Breath by breath. The wind howled through the gaps in the barn wall, dragging cold across the floor. Rain followed soon after, tapping at the tin like a clock running out of time. Redemption still hadn't moved. But his chest rose. Fell. Rose. Fell. Slow. But steady. Sometime past midnight, Eden slumped against the stall wall. Her knees ached. Her palms were raw. Blood, his and hers, stained the sleeves of her jacket. Silas brought her a mug of hot water. Not tea. Just heat. She took it without speaking. They sat in silence for a while. Then she opened the journal. The handwriting hit her like a slap, familiar and painful all at once. Her father's voice, trapped in ink. She flipped through page after page of field notes, diagrams, records, until she reached the final entry. The ink had smudged. Water damage. Or tears. But she could still read it. If he falls, they'll say he wasn't worth it. If he dies, they'll say I failed. But if he stands, even once, he becomes the thing they can't ignore. If he gives out, then you go in. Because he's not here to win. He's here to live for every horse that never got the chance to show what they could have been. Eden's hand trembled as she closed the book. She looked over at Redemption. He was still lying on his side. Eyes closed. But there was a tremor now in his leg. A faint, involuntary spasm that repeated every few seconds. Not strong enough to rise. But not dead. Not yet. At 3:14 a.m., his ears twitched toward her voice. At 3:26, he tried to lift his head. Failed. At 3:48, he opened his right eye. Just once. But it landed on her. And stayed. Eden leaned forward, whispering again. Not words. Just presence. She laid her palm against his cheek, her forehead resting gently against his. I'm here. The rain outside had stopped. The barn held only breath and silence and something else. Not hope. But refusal. The sun hadn't risen yet. But the light had changed. That pale, bruised blue of pre-dawn had begun seeping into the edges of the barn, stretching across the floorboards like fingers searching for warmth. Rain still clung to the rooftop in heavy droplets, ticking slowly as the wind lost its edge. Eden sat slumped against the inside wall of the stall, head tilted back, eyes half closed. Her hand still smelled of antiseptic and horse sweat. Redemption was breathing. That's all she cared about. The fever hadn't broken, but his pulse was steadier. His leg spasms had slowed. The swelling was holding. It wasn't healing. But it wasn't worsening. She'd call that a win. Then came the sound. Not wind. Not rain. Gravel. A slow crunch, measured, deliberate, rolling across the wet earth outside the barn like the approach of something that didn't rush. Something that had time because it had power. Eden sat upright, spine stiffening. Silas, who had dozed off in the chair near the feed sacks, opened his eyes without moving a muscle. The truck didn't honk. Didn't idle. It simply stopped. Silas shifted his weight, listening. Then, the unmistakable thump of a car door closing. One door. One person. Boots in the mud. Expensive ones, by the sound. Eden stood. She stepped out of the stall, quietly closing the gate behind her. Redemption didn't stir. But his ears flicked once, toward the entrance. He felt it too. The barn door creaked open. And there he stood. Nathan Cross. He didn't look like a traitor. He looked like every glossy photo on the back of a breeding magazine. Pressed black coat, dark jeans too clean for real ranch work, leather gloves folded in one hand. His hair was still perfect. His posture better. But it was the eyes that hadn't changed. Still scanning a room like it owed him something. His voice was even worse. I heard something came crawling back from the past. No greeting. No apology. Just precision. Eden didn't answer. She simply stood, unmoving, as he took 2 slow steps into the barn, eyes adjusting to the dim light. He saw her. Then saw Silas. Then the stall. And froze. His jaw tightened. Not fear, recognition. Is that him? Silas rose from his chair, slow and deliberate. He didn't need to speak. His presence filled the space like the last ember of a fire that refused to die out. Nathan glanced sideways at him. "I thought he was dead." "No," Silas said, his voice dry as old rope. "You just hoped he was." Nathan stepped closer to the stall. Eden moved sideways, blocking the gate. "You're not here for him." Nathan sighed, like a man forced to deal with children. "Eden, this isn't personal." She didn't blink. "You handed a death sentence to my father over a bloodline." He reached into his coat, pulled out an envelope. Sealed. Stamped. Official. He extended it to her. She didn't take it. He placed it on the wooden rail beside the stall and straightened his posture, as if satisfied. "By the authority of the National Equine Breeding Registry, this horse is deemed unregistered, undocumented, and genetically unverifiable. Under Code 17, subsection 4B, he is to be surrendered to the Council for Humane Disposal within 72 hours. The barn fell into silence. Only the sound of Redemption's shallow breathing cut through. Eden's throat was tight. "He's not a threat." Nathan gave a patronizing tilt of the head. "It's not about danger. It's about precedent. You let one slip through, and you open the floodgates. Every backyard rebel with a stud farm and a sharpet thinks they're a revolutionary." Eden's fists clenched. Silas stepped forward, his cane tapping against the floor. "You erased him once," he said coldly. "But that wasn't enough. You want to erase the fact that he even existed." Nathan looked at Silas, his voice clipped. "I did what the system asked." Silas's stare cut through him like frost. "You mean what the system paid you to do?" Nathan didn't reply. Silas took another step, his voice low, sharp as wire. "You scrubbed Garrett Marlowe's name from every paper, every registry, every feed tag. But here's what you can't do." He pointed at the stall with his cane. "You can't unteach a horse the sound of a man's voice." Nathan opened his mouth. Closed it. Something flickered in his eyes. Maybe guilt. Maybe discomfort. Maybe just ego bruised by a truth too old to argue with. Eden stepped forward, lifting the envelope from the rail. She stared at it. "This isn't law," she said. "It's a cover-up with a logo." Nathan sighed. "You don't have the resources to fight this." She held his gaze. "I don't need to win. I just need to make you uncomfortable." A beat. Nathan stepped back toward the doorway. The light behind him had started to brighten, dawn pushing against the dark. "You've got 3 days," he said. And with that, he turned. The sound of his boots faded across the gravel like a verdict. Silas exhaled long and slow. Eden didn't move. The envelope was still in her hands. She looked down at it, fingers trembling. "They'll kill him." Silas nodded. "If they can." They didn't speak after Nathan left. The barn had swallowed his footsteps, but the chill he brought with him remained like smoke in old curtains. Eden didn't let go of the envelope until the wind outside lifted a sheet of loose hay and scattered it at her boots. She tore the letter open with trembling hands. Just as she expected, words dressed in legality, stripped of heart. Form 17B, Notice of Seizure. Stamp. Barcode. Deadline. 3 days. But in reality, it was always meant to be now. Tonight. Because if Redemption couldn't stand before the sun rose, they'd come with trucks. With gloves. With white forms and black bags. And this time, she wouldn't have the luxury of walking away. By midnight, the fever had returned. Worse. Redemption's flanks were burning. His legs twitched without rhythm, uncontrollably. His mouth was dry, even though she tried water every hour. His breathing, so shallow it no longer rose with strength, only trembled as if each inhale had to bargain for space. His head didn't lift. His ears didn't track sound. His eyes remained shut. Silas brought more blankets. He set down another bucket of crushed aspirin and warm mash. Redemption didn't move. Eden knelt beside him, again and again, pressing her palms to his neck, his chest, anywhere she could feel that faint heartbeat, but even that began to blur. She couldn't tell anymore if it was him pulsing or just her desperation echoing in her skin. "Please," she whispered. She said it once, then twice, and then couldn't stop. At 2:11 a.m., Redemption let out a long, low breath that sounded like defeat. No wheeze. No resistance. Just the sound of letting go. Eden dropped to her knees and let her body fall over his. Her forehead pressed against his neck. Her arms wrapped around his shoulder. She didn't care about the dirt or the blood or the heat pouring off his skin like an animal burning from the inside out. She just held on. She didn't sob. Not at first. The crying came silently. Then came in gasps. Then turned to shaking. "I tried," she choked. I tried. Silas stood at the stall door, watching. He didn't interrupt. Didn't comfort. He knew better than to speak when the living were saying goodbye. "I left you," she whispered, her voice torn. "You were just a fool and I left you. I didn't fight. I didn't bury him properly. I didn't do a damn thing except run." Her tears soaked into the stallion's mane. His body was still warm. But it was the wrong kind of warmth. The fever kind. The dying kind. "I don't care if you never walk. Or run. Or carry a name. I just need you here. I just need you here." She pressed her face harder against him, her hands tightening in his coat. "You hear me?" Nothing. She stayed like that for what felt like years. Silas sat down outside the stall, watching the night deepen. The wind died. The rain didn't return. The barn was still. No clocks ticking. No hooves shifting. No light but the lantern, now dimming. And then, it was nothing at first. So small she almost missed it. A flutter. Her cheek was still pressed to Redemption's neck when she felt it, a faint tremble under the skin, just along his withers. She sat up. Blinked. His leg twitched. Once. Then again. She froze. "Silas," she whispered. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Redemption's hind leg curled tighter beneath him. Then his ear moved. Toward her. Eden didn't breathe. Red. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared, only slightly, but it was movement. Then, his head shifted. Not much. Less than an inch. But it turned toward her. And then, slowly, excruciatingly, one eye opened. Bloodshot. Cloudy. Weak. But open. Looking at her. Really seeing her. Eden's heart slammed into her ribs. "You're still here." She reached out, laid her hand against his cheek. His skin twitched beneath her palm. Not involuntarily this time. Reflex. Response. She leaned closer, choking on her breath. "You're still here." She didn't realize she'd slipped into the old language until it was already out. It didn't matter. Redemption moved again. A tiny grunt rose from his throat, half breath, half groan, and his foreleg scraped the stall floor like he was trying to drag himself upright. He couldn't. Not yet. But he wanted to. That was enough. Silas stood slowly, moving toward them. He didn't smile. But he knelt beside her, his withered hand resting lightly on the stall door. "He's answering you." Eden was laughing now. Crying. Laughing again. She wiped her face with her sleeve and kept whispering, "You stubborn bastard." Redemption shifted once more. Eden reached for the water bucket. This time, he licked at the surface, once, then twice. It was enough to make her weep all over again. Outside, the sky had begun to pale. The barn remained wrapped in silence. But it was a new kind. Not the silence of surrender. The silence before something begins. The morning was cruel in its brightness. Sunlight poured over the hills like it had no idea what nearly died in the dark just hours before. The wind was still, too still, and the air tasted sharp, like frost that hadn't quite let go. The Fall Valley exhibition ground stretched across the lowland like a fortress of tradition, white fences, brass nameplates, banners stitched with lineage and gold thread. Rows of polished trailers sat like sentinels. Breeders in pressed blazers sipped coffee under shade tents, not a speck of dust on their boots. Eden drove through the outer gates in Silas's ancient Ford. The engine coughed twice. The rearview mirror rattled. But the trailer held. Inside it, Redemption stood, not steady, not proud, but upright. His coat was still dull, his legs still wrapped in gauze, but there was fire in his eyes again. Not wild, not angry, just awake. Alive. At the main entrance to the grounds, a young man in a yellow vest stepped forward, clipboard in hand. He barely looked up. Name of the horse? Eden stepped out of the truck. Her boots hit the gravel hard. Redemption. The man looked up. Blinked. Registry number? She paused. Then handed him a folded piece of paper. He took it, eyebrows pinching as he read. The writing wasn't printed. It wasn't typed. Just a handwritten letter on aged paper with Silas Creed's signature at the bottom. It was equal parts testimonial, character reference, and a formal request. This horse is unregistered, but alive. He is not here to compete. He is here to be witnessed. The man stared at it. Looked at Eden. Then back at the trailer. You don't have official entry clearance. I know. This isn't regulation. I know that, too. The man scratched his neck. This wasn't the kind of decision he'd expected to make today. He waved down a second attendant, older, with a radio on his hip and a clipboard heavier than the first. They huddled. Whispered. Pointed. Silas stepped out of the truck. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The moment the older official caught sight of him, his face changed. Not with fear, but with history. Creed, he muttered. Didn't know you were still walking. Didn't know integrity had an expiration date, Silas said calmly. They locked eyes for a long moment. Then the official gestured to the letter again. This isn't standard procedure. No, Silas said. It's older than that. Another official approached from the side tent, a woman this time, sharp suit, pressed hair, and a badge clipped high. Her voice was flat. We cannot allow an unregistered animal on the primary field. Not with paying entries. Eden stepped forward, steady. Then let us walk. Not compete. Just walk. The woman's expression didn't shift. No main ring access. No showcasing. No mention in the program. No ribbons. And no complaints if someone calls security. Eden looked back toward the trailer. Redemption was standing still, his head angled just enough to catch the wind. He looked out through the slats like he'd seen all this before. Like none of it surprised him. "We don't need ribbons," Eden said. "We just need space." The woman sighed, looked over the letter again. Then finally, side arena, East End, between segments. She turned away before anyone could thank her. They guided the trailer through the inner gate with no fanfare. No welcome. No name called out over loudspeakers. Just whispers. Heads turned as Eden led Redemption down the trailer ramp, one shaky step at a time. He moved slowly. But he moved. And each hoof that touched the packed earth beneath him felt like a promise he hadn't made, but now had to keep. They reached the East End holding pen. No hay. No banners. Just dirt, fencing, and a row of skeptical stares from nearby handlers. One man in a tailored vest glanced sideways and muttered to his companion. "Did they pull that thing out of a ditch?" Eden heard it. Didn't flinch. Redemption's ears flicked once, but he stood his ground. Silas leaned on the railing, watching quietly. "They don't see what's here," he said. "They will," Eden replied. A girl, maybe 17, walked by with a prize stallion and a braided halter. She stopped, stared at Redemption, and tilted her head. "What's his bloodline?" Eden paused. Then smiled, not kindly, but clearly. "Survival." The girl blinked. Nodded once. Then walked on. There was no announcer when the time came. No name in the queue. Just a nod from the East End steward and a hand wave, now or never. Eden touched Redemption's shoulder. "It's just walking," she whispered. "We're not proving anything." He leaned toward her. That was enough. There was no music. No loudspeaker. No applause waiting at the end of the arena. Just a long strip of dirt bordered by weather-worn fencing, flanked by folding chairs and vendor tents, and above them, rows of spectators who didn't yet know they were about to remember this morning for the rest of their lives. The steward gave Eden a nod from behind the ropes. "You're on." No one announced her name. No one announced Redemption's. Eden didn't saddle him. She didn't climb onto his back. She simply walked to his side, unhooked the lead rope, and took a breath that didn't reach the bottom of her lungs. "We walk," she whispered. Redemption flicked one ear toward her voice, then stepped forward. The dirt beneath him gave slightly under his hooves. His legs were still wrapped, and his gait carried the cautious memory of trauma. But he walked. Uneven. Honest. Each step an act of defiance. The crowd wasn't ready. They didn't know what to make of her. Or him. Some chuckled. The sound was dry, disbelieving. One man near the rail leaned to his friend. "Is that a rescue case or a stunt?" "Must be a charity slot," the friend muttered back. Laughter followed them like flies. But Eden kept her eyes forward, one hand gently resting near Redemption's neck, not holding, not pulling, just there. And Redemption kept walking. Step by step. Every muscle stiff. Every breath shallow. But his head stayed high. By the time they reached the center of the arena, the noise had faded, not gone, but warped. It wasn't laughter anymore. It was confusion. Because now the audience couldn't look away. Something about the rhythm of his limp, the way Eden moved beside him, not leading, but matching him. Not demanding, but sharing weight. The farther they walked, the quieter it became. One child near the front edge of the stands whispered to her mother, "Why does it feel like he knows?" The mother didn't answer. Then it came. From the upper deck, cutting through the rising silence like a blade. "That horse is illegal." All heads turned. "He's a fraud. Unregistered freak." Gasps. A few murmurs of agreement. Some nods. But Eden didn't flinch. She didn't stop walking. She didn't even turn her head. Her voice rang out across the arena, clear, strong, and sharp enough to split every rulebook within earshot. If you think survival is fraud, then maybe it's not the horse that's broken. She paused, turned slightly toward the crowd, not confrontational, just steady. Maybe it's the system that taught you to fear anything that can't be measured. And just like that, the silence broke. Not into applause. Not yet. But into something better. Listening. Redemption stopped. Not from exhaustion, though he was close, but as if he decided the point had been made. He stood still in the center of the arena, breathing hard, eyes alert. He looked left. Then right. And slowly, deliberately, turned his head to face the stands. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't human. But it landed harder than any speech Eden could have made. A look that said, "I'm here. I exist. And I do not require your permission." The same girl from earlier, the one who asked about his bloodline, stood near the fence. She wasn't whispering now. Just watching. Hands clasped tight. A judge at the far side of the ring leaned forward. Not writing. Just watching. Something unreadable in his expression. The steward near the entrance blinked hard, then glanced at Silas, who stood outside the ropes like a statue made of time. Silas didn't speak. Didn't smile. But the corner of his mouth shifted just enough to call it something close to triumph. Eden exhaled slowly. She turned back toward Redemption. He hadn't moved. She placed her hand on his withers. Light. Barely touching. "We're done," she said softly. "You stood long enough for the world to see what it tried to bury." Then she turned with him. They walked out the same way they came in. No music. No ribbons. No spotlight. But this time, no laughter followed. Only silence, and 1,000 eyes that couldn't stop watching. The walk should have been over. Eden and Redemption had crossed half the ring on their way back toward the holding pen, the steward already turning to log the time. The crowd had started to stir again, clearing throats, reaching for coffee, tapping programs. But then, Redemption stopped. Right in the center of the arena. Forelegs planted in the dirt. He didn't falter. Didn't sway. He simply turned his head. Back toward Eden. She felt it before she saw it. The weight shift. The hesitation. The way his body pulled, not to exit, but to look for something. She turned. He was facing her. Ears forward. Waiting. Not a command. Not a need. Just presence. "You're not done, are you?" she whispered. She stepped toward him. One slow step. Then another. Redemption didn't move. He waited. And when she reached him, she didn't speak. She pressed her forehead gently against the side of his face, just below the eye, where the skin was still warm despite everything. Her hand rose and rested along the line of his jaw. He let out a slow breath, quiet, controlled. The entire arena held still. A chair creaked in the judging booth. Then came the voice. Not loud, but old. And certain. "I don't need papers," the man said, "to recognize a bond." Every head turned. One of the senior judges, gray suit, older than most, eyes like worn granite, had stood from his seat. "You and that horse," he continued, "are the first thing I've seen today that matters." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The younger judges shifted in their seats. One reached for the microphone. Another said nothing, just watched. But no one interrupted. Not now. This system was built to count things, the old man said. To weigh bloodlines and check boxes. But it never learned how to see. He pointed, slowly, to redemption. That's what they missed. That right there. Eden didn't answer. Didn't bow. Didn't smile. She just stood with redemption, their silhouettes burned into the dirt by morning light. No badge. No score. No ribbon. But no one forgot what they saw. That night, the sky above Fall Valley was clear. No clouds. No noise. Just stars. Eden stood outside the barn, a thin slab of old pine in her hands. The edges were rough. The grain uneven. But it had held up through 2 winters behind Silas's tool shed, weathered enough to be honest. She knelt beside the fence post and pressed a heated iron into the wood. The scent of smoke curled up, sharp and raw. A curved mark took shape. Not a letter. Not a number. Just a symbol. A crescent. The shape of a half moon. The print of a worn horseshoe turned sideways. The mark her father had burned once into Redemption's shoulder, in secret. In defiance. Now, it would face the world. Above the symbol, she etched nothing. No name. No lineage. Below it, she carved a single line with a dull chisel, hand steady despite the late hour. For those they tried to erase. That was all. She stepped back. Looked at the barn. Looked at the stall. Inside, Redemption stood with his head low, eyes half closed, not from weakness now, but from peace. Not tamed. Not broken. Just seen. Silas came to stand beside her, arms folded, a blanket slung over one shoulder. That sign won't mean anything to most folks, he said. Eden didn't take her eyes off the stall. It's not meant for them. They stood in silence for a while. Then Silas added, almost to himself. He was never part of their system. But he outlasted it. Eden nodded. So did my father. The wind picked up. The symbol on the board caught the moonlight. And for the first time in a long time, Eden didn't feel like she was standing in defiance. She was standing in continuation of a truth that didn't need approval to survive. Sometimes the world doesn't erase you with bullets or headlines. It erases you with silence. It writes you out of the books. It deletes your name from the registry. It pretends you never mattered because you didn't fit the blueprint someone else built. But not everything that lives outside the lines is broken. And not every voice that goes quiet has lost its right to speak. Redemption wasn't a miracle. He was a reminder that what cannot be measured can still matter. That worth doesn't come with paperwork. It comes with presence. With showing up. Even when you're not invited. If this story touched something in you, share it. Because somewhere out there may still be souls like Redemption. Unnamed. Unclaimed. Unrecognized. But still fighting to stand. Leave a comment below. We want to hear your story. What you've seen. What you've lost. And what you've saved. And if you believe that life doesn't need permission to exist, then hit like, share, and subscribe. So you won't miss the next story. About those imperfect souls. The world tried to forget, but couldn't.